in that country. Then, is this the end of women's colleges? Behind the headlines, America's first all-female mosque.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the women of Afghanistan.
Women leaders from Afghanistan were in the U.S. this week as part of the delegation traveling with Afghanistan's new president, Ashraf Ghani. At a forum at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, they called on their American sisters for continued support.
We have a lot of achievement during this 14 years in Afghanistan. It was not easy, but it was with the fighting of Afghan women and also the support of international partners. So we don't want to lose all the achievement and demolish everything that we have done. The number of women in our political system and the government.
First time in our history we have equal rights for men and women in the Constitution. First time in our history we criminalize domestic violence against women, but it doesn't mean that we achieved everything and we are done with women's rights. We still suffer from a lot of violence and discrimination in the country.
The mob killing of an Afghani woman falsely accused of burning a copy of the Quran underscores the fragile nature of women's gains. But these leaders say there's cause for optimism.
Thousands of not only actually women, actually men came out. Men were crying, and men are still crying for the right, for justice. For the first time ever in the history of Islam, women got together and they said, we are going to carry her coffin ourselves. And for the first time ever, actually men were surrounding the woman, making sure that they were protected and they were doing that properly. For the first time, it was the woman actually that they put her coffin within the grave. I mean, we just changed the custom.
The women leaders hope more change will follow.
They are not only seeking justice for Farkhanda, they're also demanding from the National Unity Government that the government has to reform the justice sector. The government has to reform the security sector. The government has to bring women in this sector and make sure that they are not discriminated.
So, Anushay Hossain, what happens to the women in Afghanistan who've made all this progress if President Obama pulls out troops next year as planned?
They're going to keep fighting for women's rights. The movement is going to continue, irrespective of if the military is there or not.
And I think we have an opportunity for this to be a global movement where we're supporting these women.
And let's be honest, Afghanistan's got more women in elected office than we do, so let's not lose hope.
Increased implementation, laws are not enough. We need to make sure it translates to the ground.
Okay, so you say they're going to be fine without U.S. troops there?
Well, I think that the focus that it keeps, the international focus on women's rights and girls in Afghanistan is very important. But let's not kid ourselves. The military is not going to deliver women's rights and liberation for Afghanistan. I mean, remember, what was it, like 10 years ago that George Bush declared them free? Well, we know that's not how it works. And I think too often when you work in Washington, I've worked on this issue and lobbied for it for over a decade, we get so caught up with, oh, we got a legal change, you know, we got a political change. This is very important, but ultimately it has to be homegrown, organic, and cultural. What we just saw with those women carrying that woman's body, that's what we need. That was revolutionary. As a Muslim woman, I've never seen that. It's just never seen
You've never seen women carrying a coffin?
The body, yeah.
And protected by men usually would be a woman-only funeral.
Exactly.
I think what's very powerful and why I keep emphasizing implementation is that with the military withdrawing, it's important that U.S. not lose sight of Afghanistan, and the way to do it is through technical assistance and funding. USAID, UN, other international agencies need to make sure that they're providing women the resources to do the fights that they're doing.
And that's not a repeat of history. It's not that like the U.S. is leaving Afghanistan for the first time. So the fear is this abandonment, and it's a, you know, it's a genuine fear. I mean, it's validated. It's happened to them before.
How do we get American women to care about Afghani women? Let's face it. You know, if you're unemployed, your partner's unemployed, your kids are hungry, why are you going to care about what happens to women?
Well, I think,
or you may care, but if you got to take care of yourself first, which most women do.
Well, I think what was said, again, we're in Simpatico today. I think this, for example, USAID is very, very important. I had the privilege of speaking in Bangladesh as a keynote, and the women of Afghan, the elected women were there. And they were unbelievably impressive. I must say, of all the elected women from Southeast Asia that were there, they were the most impressive contingent. They're unbelievably well educated, unbelievably articulate. There's huge challenges here, let's not kid ourselves. But there's also far more strength and infrastructure there within the culture itself among the Afghani women than we often give them credit for. So I would say it's going to be organizations like USAID being present, bringing women, American women, other women in to talk, to support, to challenge, to encourage, that's going to make a big difference over time.
And I'll also add, I think there's a role for microfinancing and lending, where we're giving women economic empowerment so that they can own their future, they can provide for their families, and it gives them a level of independence. And I think when we continue to see that here or wherever women are repressed, they'll be able to strengthen themselves in their position.
And speaking of strengthening their position, you're the only one on this panel who agrees with the Afghan women that, and you would think that they would know something about their own situation more than we know, that troops should stay. Why?
I think one of the elements, it goes back to why we should care. Women are the canaries in the mine, and when women are telling us the area is not stable, we should pay attention. It goes way beyond women's issues. It goes to a security and stability issue, and we've seen over and over that research has shown when women have rights, you see an increased level of democracy and consultation and inclusiveness, which is so essential for Afghanistan to remain secure.
And the president spoke out this week and said, the president of Afghanistan said he's an economist and he wants to end, his primary concern is ending corruption because the country is totally corrupt. How important a role do women play in that?
Women play an absolutely essential role when you're talking about corruption. Even when you look at the issue with Farkhunda and the issue of police standing by, it really ties into the issues dealing with corruption, to security sector reform when you're talking about police and military, as well as President Ghani was saying, one of his goals is to actually reintegrate the Taliban back into the community. And if women are not at the forefront of that conversation, you may have a reintegration without de-radicalization, which is dangerous.
Well, I agree with you that the security is really important, but we also have to remember that everything has been happening in Afghanistan with the presence of the U.S. troops. So I have an issue with the U.S. military safeguarding women's rights. A complete pullout would, of course, create... I mean,
well, they're not safeguarding women's rights. They're keeping the Taliban from recapturing the country, and that would be horrendous for women to go back to.
And I don't disagree. I just think that's important to learn from Iraq. I think it's very important to do, if we do have a withdrawal or when we have the withdrawal, it's just be responsible.
Exactly.
And what has happened to the women of Iraq since the U.S. pulled out?
The women of Iraq, unfortunately, have gone backwards. I mean, we've seen them, any gains that they had, I wouldn't even say in the last 10 years, but from the 1960s have been erased. And at this point, their only concern is staying alive. You know, the concept of fighting for women's rights right now is just a far dream when you have the country really in the midst of chaos and violence.
And is ISIS close to putting troops, and are they active in Afghanistan at all?
Well, we heard from President Ghani that that was a concern, and I think that what we're seeing is that this is truly global. I mean, you have ISIS having pledged allegiance from Libya, from Nigeria, Mali's not far behind, so I don't think it's a stretch to think Afghanistan and Pakistan will have stronger networks moving forward.
And what do you think we should do about it?
Well, I think, again, this whole idea of military withdrawal, it's how we handle it, it's how we do it. Iraq conveniently, sadly, offers us some very, very telling observations. What I loved, again, I'm really loving everything you're saying today, by the way. When you said canary in the coal mine, women are the canary in the coal mine, I think that's a brilliant statement that is so true. I think we need to pay attention to that in how we do this military withdrawal, though I would say the sentiment of the American public is irrefutable. We can't stay there. So how do we manage it in a way that the American public can swallow, that politically Obama can, carry forward, is the challenge.
One last question. Will women be at the peace talks?
They have to be.
They better be.
They better be.
They better be.
If the Taliban are part of the talks, how does that work? They won't.
I think it should be a non-negotiable.
I think so too, exactly. We need to have women at those discussion tables.
Yeah.
All right. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or @ToTheContrary. From women leaders to women's colleges.
women-only colleges may be headed for extinction. The most recent casualty is Sweetbriar College, which will close this May. In the early 1960s, there were between 250 and 300 women's colleges in the U.S. and Canada. When Sweetbriar closes, there will be 44. The school's president blames a lack of interest among younger women in attending single-sex schools, but it's not universally seen as a bad thing and may be a sign of success for the women's movement. Research shows in recent years, women attend co-ed colleges at higher rates than men.
So, Sam Bennett, is it progress for women that they're not feeling that they need women-only colleges anymore?
I think this is further evidence of what I would describe as our biggest problem in the women's movement, or the American public at large, is we don't see that we have a problem. When we look at the statistics of how poorly women are represented politically, we rank 97th in the world in the number of women in elected office. And you can just rattle off 1,000 statistics just like that.
Number 20 in the world on the World Economic Forum.
Absolutely.
Where we used to be
number
much higher.
one. Number one. So I think our biggest problem is that we walk around as American women thinking we have it all going on when nothing could be further from the truth. And there's irrefutable evidence. The Girl Scouts have done the best job around this, I feel, that when women go to all-girls schools, colleges, and when young girls go to all-girls schools, they outperform both men and women academically. Why is that? Well, they're existing in a sexist-free environment where they can truly blossom and truly be themselves. Your average American woman, as soon as she walks out of her door, I don't care where she lives in America, she's walking into a sexist environment. That is the groundwater we drink, that is the air that we breathe. And the only place you're safe from it is maybe a convent or an all-girls college, right? So, what's the answer here? I think we've got to wake up and smell the coffee. That girls schools...
You went to an all-girl college?
I wish I had. But all-girls schools...
Because I did. Actually.
Ooh, what do you think?
Well, I went to Barnard, which is, of course, part of Columbia, and so it was an all-women's experience in some ways, but you could take classes at Columbia. So it was both, really.
The best of both
so
worlds.
I can't tell you that, like Sweetbriar, where it was all girls and only girls on campus.
But if I could say, okay, Bonnier Bay, you've been doing this show for almost 25 years. It's the only show like it in America. So therefore, and America is has the biggest, economy in the world. So here we are. You're at the top of the heap. And where did she go? An all-girls college. Case closed. All right.
Your thoughts?
I think that's a very fair point. This is my turn to agree with you. I went to an all-girls high school, and once I entered into college, I could see just my level of confidence. I was playing basketball, sports, everything in the high school that I never second-guessed. And once I entered college, I was finding myself trying to withdraw a little bit more. I do think that your point about us thinking we have as many rights or as many privileges as we do and not recognizing problems is spot on. We're really seeing this over and over in terms of us really finding ourselves not having the progress or the liberation that we want. And if we do, it's on a very superficial level.
I'm kind of torn because I feel like the millennials have such a more progressive view and gender relations in general. So I feel like maybe this is a little outdated and maybe we should thrive together instead of separately. That being said, I have many friends that went to all-girl high schools, colleges, and they loved it. And then some who were horrendously bullied, so I don't know.
That's a good point.
Well, and I think this is indicative of higher
Bullied by
education
other
right now.
women?
Yeah, like I feel like the level of kind of mean girls is a little bit more intense, but maybe that's a big stereotype too.
I think this is indicative of higher education and just the changes in our higher education system. I think you're seeing a lot of these colleges that are falling away because they're not demonstrating the value to customers, to millennials, to younger people as they did before. And we'll continue to see this. What we really need is higher education reform from a broader perspective that allows us as individuals going in to craft the kinds of educations that moves across disciplines and industries. And I don't think we're seeing that with some of these schools.
Well, and a lot of the women's schools that used to be all women's schools are admitting men too, just as all the Ivy League male colleges. I remember I applied to college the first year that Yale was accepting applications from women. It had been an all men's school for all of its history. Is it possible then to maybe start thinking about all women's dorms, classes within a university system? That's pretty much what Columbia has turned Barnard into now.
Well, I think the issue is to your point. I think what we have is, again, that disconnect issue, right? We think we're one place, and in truth, we're over here. We're the frog in the boiling water. That's what we are right now in this issue. So I think it's a public relations issue. I think it's a communications issue. I think we have to talk about the inordinate benefit that is enjoyed when we give women, as you so eloquently put, that experience of being around other women, that confidence factor. That is the single biggest thing. And we all are familiar with that classic middle school girl fall off the cliff syndrome, right? Girls are fine until they get to middle school, and then all of a sudden they disappear. Why? Because they can't compete successfully with the boys. Why? Because they're in a sexist environment. None of us intend to create that sexist environment, but it exists.
But, you know, and you talk about millennials being more egalitarian, but if you look at
Campus sexual assault.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
well, campus sexual assault, first of all, which either didn't exist or just wasn't talked about when I was in college. But secondly, look at Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Look at young millennial women are being squeezed out. No matter how equal they think they are, when they show up, they're not.
I also feel like they are fighting back and calling it out with a vigor that, you know, I don't know, I just feel like we haven't seen it before. And I think that's why we're having a lot of these discussions. I don't think campus sexual assaults just started in the past 2 years. I think women are just saying, no more, no more, across the board.
Well, in millennial young women, we see ourselves less as victims, and we like to be in communities. And so whether it's on a campus or somewhere else where the women are together in communities, we build and encourage one another, and we need to see that.
Well, as a boomer, let me tell you, I never saw myself as a victim, ever.
I take exception to that statement. So I take exception to that statement.
Here we
Thank goodness
are,
you never saw yourself as a victim, Bonnie.
I went out into the world believing I was as good as anybody else, and I didn't really run into sexism until I worked at a commercial network, and oh my God.
And I just want to say, for any woman that is, as I have, who's been raped, who's experienced sexual abuse, been white trafficked, those of us that have the privilege of healing never consider ourselves victims. We consider ourselves survivors. So just take exception to that.
And I think that's true globally. We always hear women talk about themselves as survivors, and I think that what's powerful is that they don't stop at survivors, they go on to active citizenship.
Right, and to call yourself a victim lets whoever did what it was that was done to you, gives them power.
Yeah.
Call yourself a survivor and a fighter. You take back the power.
And I think about like my field in terms of foreign policy, you know, women who are in my generation have started this new initiative called Foreign Policy Interrupted, which is fellowships for young women who are up and coming, who've proven a track record. And so not only are we thriving in our own generations, but we're really thinking about how do we make sure that that goes down, which I would say in my personal experience, I was hungry for women mentors. And so I'm glad to see that we're now able to provide mentorship to new generations.
And if I could, but thank you for saying what you did, because that's very common. We hear it all the time, so we had a chance to talk about it on the air, so thank you.
All right, behind the headlines, the first all-female mosque in the U.S. recently opened in Los Angeles. The women behind the mosque hope it fosters increased awareness of the important role of women in Islam.
Women's mosques do exist around the world, and the majority of them are in China. There are also a few in Yemen, Syria, even in South America. This is the first successful women's mosque that we know of in the United States.
Hasna Maznavi is the co-founder of the Women's Mosque of America. Maznavi has envisioned building a mosque ever since childhood.
I had no idea that it would be a women's mosque. My concept of what a mosque is completely changed over the course of my life. You know, as a child, I used to think like it was all about the building and the structure and the pretty, you know, architecture of it. And then as I grew older, I started to think more about the function of a mosque in society.
Maznavi, a comedy film writer, came together with Sanaa Mutalib, an attorney and friend. They worked hard to make the mosque a reality. The women share a dream.
My personal vision for the Women's Mosque is a worldwide Islamic renaissance that is shaped by Muslim women's voices, perspectives, scholarship, and leadership.
Maznavi says there's precedent for women's leadership in Islamic culture and spirituality.
If you look into the early history of Islam, women were at the forefront. The first Muslim was a woman. The person who held the only original copy of the Quran was a woman. the scholars of that time all had female teachers, and there were tens of thousands of female Muslim scholars who were teaching Muslim society at that time.
At this mosque, women will lead prayers, give sermons, and participate in a Quran study program. Its leaders also hope to offer Muslim women speakers to general audiences, something they believe is desperately needed.
In the American media, Muslim women are often spoken on behalf of. Usually when you hear from us, you're not actually hearing from us. You're hearing other people comment on us, and usually about the way we dress. Muslim women are so much more than just the way we dress. We're doctors, lawyers, comedians. The youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner was a Muslim girl.
There is no dress code at the mosque. It's come as you please. Right now, Friday services are held once a month. They don't want to replace traditional mosques, but act instead as a complementary resource.
This is a place of empowerment that women can come to, grow, learn, and grow closer to their sisters in faith, and then return to their existing and local mosques and help make them stronger. This project and this mosque comes from a place of love and inspiration. It's not a reaction to the state of mosques, although we do attract a lot of people who've had bad experiences in mosques. Really, this is a callback and a celebration to the rich legacy of female scholarship and leadership within Islam that we'd love to see flourish more today.
So, do you think, it troubles me a little bit, I have to say, that here these women are taking a great stand and empowering themselves and other Muslim women, and yet they only offer it once a month as a compliment. Why shouldn't it be an everyday mosque?
I think that's very important that women remain integrated in the primary mosque interaction so that young men, boys, the imams are held accountable for including women. Because one of the fears is you then begin to marginalize women. It's always the concern of having a Ministry of Women's Affairs when we're talking about transitional countries. We don't want it to be parked in one area. So I think it's very smart. It's very strategic. I was very happy and proud of these young women who are taking initiative of something that I personally have always sought out, because in those day-to-days, so 3 days out of the month you're going to these imams, you're fighting, whether you want to or not. It goes back to your comment about women's campuses. You're entering into a patriarchal building, no matter what the intention is, and it's exhausting and draining. So that once a month to be able to go and be surrounded by your peers, be able to be completely comfortable to nourish your spirituality and not have to elbow your way to the table is powerful.
Okay, interesting that you say you need to lead, be an example to boys. Are men changing?
Most definitely. I mean, if you think about this, I mean, in 10, 15, 20 years ago, there would have been protests outside of the mosque. There would have been a plethora of scholars denouncing the mosque. There would have been accusations of trying to marginalize and embarrass the Muslim community by going outside and making commentary on the thing. And what you've seen is a huge amount of support from some of the top scholars. And again, I think it really is testimony to the founders and the co-founders in terms of the attitude that they've taken to this. Everyone that I know and has spoken to have been very proud of this initiative.
I just want to say high five. I mean, I just want to dance on the table. These are the stories of Muslim women and girls that we need. And it works both ways, because the stereotypes we are spoken for, but also the men in our communities are horribly vilified, and I just think this is great. This is what we need.
Well, vilified, you mean because what most people see on TV
Because the stereotype is Muslim women are oppressed, and who's oppressing us? We're just under the thumb of these men. So I think this is great, because this is the change that we need. No more men telling us what our faith is saying across the board, not only in Islam. This is great.
This is one of those moments where I'm like, okay, this is great, I'm with it, but as an observer on the outside, we have situations where women are being extraordinarily oppressed by this same religion. Now, my faith, Christian, right? We've done our fair share, right? No one's alone in this. But what I find difficult and challenging is, let's not get lost. Let's make sure that the good stories come out, right? Which is what you're talking about. It's important. But what do we do with the contrast? What do I do as a woman of faith, my faith, who respects the Muslim faith immeasurably? How do I make that reconciliation? Because I know for a fact these other horrible things are happening, even in this country. So what do I do? I'm asking.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I have to say Muslims are asking the same question.
Yes.
Muslim women are asking the same question because we know what our faith says, and we know that in addition to the first that were mentioned, the first Sufi saint was a woman. So kind of the enlightenment, the love, that was a woman who brought that notion to Islam. So very powerful historical precedent that we've lost, and I'm not embarrassed to say that we've lost it. How do we regain it? I'm not putting rose-colored glasses on. I know the challenges. I would just say religious extremism tends to target women, and we've seen even within Buddhism in Burma where religious extremism is being used and Buddhist monks are doing horrible things. No religion, even today, is exempt from that horror.
And I've also heard, by the way, that it's not the religion, it's the culture that creates things like ISIS, you know, keeping women essentially as sex slaves and it's
sexist men using religious texts to back them up.
It's war.
And by the way, we have a documentary on a group called Karama coming up the end of next month, and it's all about Muslim women crusading for taking equality under the Quran because they say it's been misinterpreted by men. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.